Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast Pixels and Bytes, a podcast about all things product and tech.
And I'm Baps. This is Ani, and this is our first episode of Pixels and Bytes. And we're excited to release this first episode because before we begin, I just want to mention who this is for. Yeah. If you are a product builder, or if you're someone who's aspiring to be a product builder, or if you're just someone who's curious about products in general and how they work, this podcast is for you, and I think you'll find this super interesting in terms of job functions. So if you're a designer, if you're a developer, if you're a product marketer, if you're someone in growth, this podcast can give you some insights by us sharing the journeys of people who have built their own products and Solopreneurship journeys as well. So that's a little bit about some context for the podcast.
I think essentially, if somebody is building, launching, growing a product at the early stages or a little later, I think they're still going to get a lot of value here.
Let me quickly go over what this episode is going to be about. A quick agenda. Firstly, we'll start off with a couple of introductions, get to know your hosts a little bit. Then we're going to go into why is it that we're doing this podcast, our personal reasons, and how we feel this is going to help you sort of benefit, right? Then we're going to talk a little bit about something that both of us are really passionate about, something that we've experienced a lot in our career, which is essentially a couple of things about products, also a little bit about low-code and no-code tech, a little bit about technical and non-technical founders, right? And how all of this comes together in the current ecosystem of people who are building projects, either side projects or startups, right? And probably towards the end, we're going to try and bring in a couple of stories. We're going to have a conversation all around a couple of our learnings in the space, and sort of wrap it up with that, giving you a quick preview in terms of what we've got planned in the upcoming episodes.
So I think let's just jump in right. First thing is let's sort of talk about why we're doing this podcast, right? I know that you've given a quick intro in terms of why people should be listening to this, but why are we doing this podcast? Do you want to start off with that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts in my head all day about the products that I'm building, and I'm usually building these products sitting in my small room in India, and I'm just tinkering away with stuff on my computer, working on something in Blocks app, which is like this no-code website builder that I'm using to build my website, and I'm tinkering away, and I have all these thoughts. And I remember that there used to be a time that with PrimoBoss, for example, which is my Web3 startup, I would share the creation process of the product, and I would share this every day on Twitter. And now in recent months, or even like the last 1 year, I haven't shared as much content on social. Yeah. So and also some of these insights when it comes to product branding or brand identity, or even the user experience side of things. When I've shared it with people in the space when I'm working on my own products, I think it's been insightful to them, and I've been able to pick up insights from them. But I haven't put them out in the public. Mm-hmm. So this podcast will give me a format where I can share what I'm working on, what I've already worked on, like knowledge and insights. And I think it's a good way to also start conversations with other people in the space. And the other reason was also that I want to make sure that I'm putting out content that is accessible to people in multiple formats. But we don't want this to be like podcast only. So just a heads up, if you're listening to this, we'll make multiple formats of this podcast available to you. So you'll see videos of this podcast on YouTube, shorts on Instagram, things like that. But yeah, I mean that's my why. What's your why for the podcast?
So for me, I think for the longest time, I've loved to meet people. Loved to hold conversations with them. I'm known as that 2 a.m. conversations friend. Yeah, I am my friend circle, and not just amongst friends. Like even when you're going out meeting new people, stories and conversations are something for the longest time. Ever since I was a child, it's something that has always caught my fancy. It's always caught my interest. Yeah. right? Both professionally and personally. It's a way in which people who listen to conversations or engage in conversations, it's a way for you to learn, it's a way for you to contextualize and formulate your thoughts and take away things that might be something that only you take away. So for me, this podcast is all about that, to have some great conversations and through that, hopefully deliver some value to folks who are listening to us. And I think on that front, both you and I, for the longest time, because we've been active in the startup ecosystem and more, giving out value to other people is something that both of us are passionate about. You as an educator for the longest time, and myself in terms of the work that I've done working with early stage companies and more, right? So I think this is what the podcast is about, and I think that's what is going to be so exciting in the coming editions. Is how is it that we're going to hack this together as first time podcasters. So, and I'm pretty sure throughout this episode, they're going to actually, any smart listener is going to really figure out how awkward we are on camera and also right here. But yeah, I think that's a little bit about why we're starting this podcast, why people should be listening to us. Right? Before we get into anything a little more conversation heavy, I think we should also do a little quick introduction of ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So after you.
I started off in Android development, and I would spend a lot of my time working on Android apps, like designing Android apps and also developing them in Android Studio. And I think in 2019 I was Google sponsored me to go to San Francisco for the Google I/O 2019 event, and that kind of changed how I saw development, Android development, but also so many other things that Google was working on at the time. And I also saw like the impact of design on business itself and impact of design on a product. So I think that was something that piqued my interest in design, because I was kind of partially interested in design at the time, and then that piqued my interest, and then very early on in my career I transitioned into design. And I started working in UX design, then I've done like marketing design, I've done brand design, and then now I'm at a point where I have my brand identity design book. It's published on Amazon, and then you also have my first video course, and that's about Figma. And I'm working on my second video course. So I have these educational products in the design space, and it's usually meant to help other designers. And also I have a few other design resources like Figma, Figma kits and things like that. And also exploring things that I can do outside of this space now that we have AI, just to say exploring like no code tools and AI. And I've always worked with no code tools, but the mix of AI and no-code tools is kind of interesting right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a little bit of backstory about me, and I'd love for you to share your story with our audience.
I think one thing I like about your story is that you're also a developer turned designer, right? And I think that brings tremendous amount of value to especially the product space, especially when you're designing. It's very important to keep in mind the technical details so that your designs are not just great to look at, but also feasible to make, right?
Yeah.
I'm on the other end of the spectrum. Even though I am an engineer, right? I have left everything about my engineering. It's the very cliche, you go do your engineering first, and then you find out what your passion is about. So in fact, I found out right in my second year of college. That's when I started my first startup, and that's where
that's nice. Yeah, it's pretty early.
Yeah, pretty early. And this was I think 2016.
And how successful were you back then?
19.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And this was when the startup wave was just starting. Right? This was when not every second person was a startup founder back then.
Yeah.
Right? And it was a very unglamorous startup that I started off. It was an edtech startup. We were educating students. Over the span of 2.5, 3 years, we upskilled, I think, about 8,000 students.
Oh, wow.
15 different cities.
Yeah, that's a good metric. Right? Yeah.
But we never took it to the next stage. Because it was in the edtech space, by then you had your Byju's, your Vedant, Vedantus, who had your Unacademies. Heavily funded companies come in. It was already a space where a sustainable business model was still being figured out.
Yeah.
Right. So we decided to sort of close shop there, and we moved on to I moved on to my next venture, my second startup, which was in the entertainment recreational space. Once again, there it was about 2.5 years. Had to sort of stop down due to COVID. Then I sort of exited there, and for I think a month or two, I really sat down to figure out what do I want to do next. Right. By this point, I'd successfully graduated from my college, and that's a great point of achievement for me.
Yeah.
Barely managed it, but yeah. And I was in love with the startup ecosystem, even though I wasn't a founder myself. And that's when I started joining early stage companies, growing out businesses and products, moving them from 0 to 1 to 10 stages, getting them those first couple of dollars in. And this this limited me not just to grow the marketing, but also to work on the products themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense.
Especially at early stage startups, you are required to wear a lot of hats, different hats, quite literally. Right. So you had your marketers working on the product. They were pseudo product managers as well.
Yeah.
Right. You worked with the designers. You worked with the developers. You were doing pseudo user research. Because that's how it is. You're trying to ship fast, and I've done that across different domains. And now I'm more active in the Web3 space, in the AI spaces, where I'm working on a couple of side projects, working professionally with a couple of clients. So that's where I'm at right now, and it's super exciting, especially because Web3 AI, generative AI, right? In the past 2 to 3 years, these are the waves that are coming.
Yeah.
Right? These are the revolutions that are going to set the tone for probably the next decade. Right? AR, VR, the way AI interfaces with all of these technologies, the bleeding edge of tech. Right? And that's super exciting because the kind of products that we build also changes. The way we take them to market changes. The way users interact with all of this changes. And so I'm like super excited about all of this. And I think that's also where we share our passion in terms of being able to do this kind of work. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a little bit about me. I do geek out a little bit on technology.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty obvious. I think it might be helpful to also let people know what they'll get out of this podcast. And for me, what that means is that, we want to cover traditional tech or conventional tech, and we also want to make sure that we cover cutting edge tech.
Correct.
So with traditional tech, we want to make sure that it's tech that has had impact, and with cutting edge tech or something that's new, we just want to see what's happening in the industry and kind of educate people about it and see what we've explored. And I'm currently working on 2 AI products, one that has got to do with healthcare and the other that has got to do with design education. And so I've been in conversation with some AI engineers, and the lessons that I'm picking up from them, they're worth sharing, and the lessons that I'm picking up while I'm working on my AI products. There's so many nuances of AI that I think is worth sharing right now, just because we're still at a very early stage.
Correct.
So that's a little bit about, one of the reasons that one of the things that I think people can take away from this podcast.
Right.
And is there anything that you want to add to that?
So I think adding on to what you said is when you're building products, when you are trying to sort of deliver value, not just products, probably you're building out, designing a service in the form of a product and offering that. In all of this, there's also, your ups and downs, right? You've been an educator for the longest time. You've been active in the design community, in the tech community, and other places where despite, your clearly hectic schedules, you still managed to find some time to give back to the community, right? And this was even back when you were doing your Web3 startup and you were building in public, right? That's what you were doing, giving away value for free, right? And in line with that is also that when you're building stuff, you also are having a little bit of an issue in terms of keeping your motivation up. Sometimes it's not all highs, it's your highs and lows. And there's more lows in the beginning than there are highs, right? And there's a lot to learn, especially because I have very intentionally worked with only early stage startups, maximum to like seed level. And I've seen this firsthand in terms of what are the challenges you face, not just from a product or a business point of view, but also from a team building point of view, your founder psychology point of view, your team's motivation and encouragement, what's the overall vibe like, things like these. A lot of these things, the softer aspects of building a business, building a product, scaling a product or a business, right? And I think there's a little bit that I want to share on that front through this, because it's going to have a remarkable effect on complementing the kind of skill, the hard skills that you build, be it a dev, as a designer, as a product manager, or otherwise. These softer aspects are going to really plug in so that you can do your work more effectively. It's going to help you not make mistakes that folks have already done, right? And in that way, probably I'm also trying to sort of deliver value here, some of the lessons that we've learned, and also see, especially from our guests coming forward, what they can share that's going to be really valuable. So I think this podcast is not just going to be about product and tech from that aspect, but also from a human aspect. And on that note, I think what I wanted to really sort of touch upon is what are your thoughts on the current way that the overall startup ecosystem and at large the builder ecosystem is coming up?
So I think one thing that I like to refer to are reports. And when I say reports, I specifically mean like state of reports.
Okay.
So YouGov, like YOUGOV, YouGov, that's it's an organization that provides reports on the current state of things. And so before starting this podcast, for example, I looked at a report about podcasting from YouGov, and there were some really helpful insights about things like podheads are people who listen to podcasts for 5 hours or more, and there are I think 23% of people who listen to podcasts are podheads, something like that. So there's also another. I'd like to give a shout out to this website, stateof.io. Sorry, stateof.ai. So stateof.ai is the State of AI website where you can find the State of AI 2023 report, which lets you take a look at the industry at large and the AI industry, the AI domain, and what's happening, what happened so far, and what are some of the major changes, or what are some things that we can look forward to, and things like that. So I found that report was very helpful, and McKinsey also has a helpful report which gives you an overall insight into what's happening in the industry, because when we're working in small spaces in our own worlds, it's important to kind of take a look at the state of things, which state of AI or the state of AR, VR. And I like to kind of fall back on some of those resources, but I also have my network, which I can always leverage on to see what's happening in the startup ecosystem and how startups are innovating. And I think this year it's been like all about AI, and it sounds so cliche, but that's where I think that's where my mind is right now. But what do you think? What are your thoughts on the startup ecosystem at large?
So I think how so the startup ecosystem is mainly run by the investments that come in, right? And yesterday it was Web3, today it's generative AI. Before that it was e-commerce.
Yeah.
So your waves which come in, you have specific funds that get set up. You have companies that bloom, companies that wane, companies that get sold off, companies that shut down, right? So you burn $1 billion and probably like unlock. Finally, it's about on say 100 companies. Probably it's 10 companies that are going to unlock value worth over 10 million over a span of time, right? So for me, the startup ecosystem is super volatile, and yet, despite it being conditional on the trend of times, as I call it, it still is something that continues to draw in people, because it's not a bad thing to fail.
Yeah.
Right. Just a good example of it is something like acquisition.com or any of these micro acquisition websites. In case you're unable to scale a project, but you've still managed to crack something of value, be it in terms of traffic, be it in terms of users, be it in terms of revenue, whatever it might be, right? You can still find a way for it to be acquired and integrated into a larger service offering, which is probably offering better value towards end user. Right? So for me, it's something that, since I've been in the ecosystem for a while as a founder and also as somebody who's a team member building systems, I'm someone who's super, super bullish on stuff like this. I love to support underdogs, especially early stage startups. 90% of them end up in the graveyard, but it's basically all of that blood and sweat that goes in there that actually props up the industry. So in like about 2 to 3 years, Web3 is not going to be a term you're going to throw around a lot. AI is not going to be a term you're going to throw around a lot. Generative AI or AR, VR, metaverse, all of these terms are going to fade into the background. Just like e-commerce today is a thing of that everybody knows, which was the first wave, earliest wave, I think, in the tech wave of India. All of these blend into the background, and the products that use these or leverage these technologies or are in these domains, they start delivering value. So once all of this fades into the background, into insignificance, the terms and technology behind it, but the end outcomes that these technologies and the products that they build are looking to serve, right? That becomes more valuable and more impactful. I think that's where every startup wave and the entire startup ecosystem is headed overall. It's in the graves of the predecessors that the most successful outcomes are built. So I think that's my view on the startup ecosystem and the builder ecosystem at large. It's something that you are relentless in.
Yeah, that's true.
And you just keep doing it for sake of doing it, and you eventually win. Because the words of Mark Cuban, you just need one bet to pay off. That's it. That's it. Right?
There's been I was reading. I think it's important to talk a little bit about how technology has enabled us in ways that if you look back like a few decades ago, it wouldn't have enabled them. So this is rule of like 10,000 hours. You need to put in 10,000 hours, and the 10,000 hours meant like you need to put in like so many years. You need to put more than a decade in. And I was reading Ish Verdusko's book about where he's written about different case studies of how people became successful. And if you look at Beethoven and Taylor Swift, for example, it's like a very unconventional example. So I'm fully aware of how I'm sure like Beethoven and Taylor Swift are not mentioned usually in the same sentence. So Beethoven, he was partially deaf, and towards the end of his career, he became fully deaf. And because there was no technology during his time, he couldn't, do something about his deafness and make combat that and continue making music. And then you look at someone like Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift obviously has a lot of talent, and the thing is that she also has technology on her side, which has enabled us to build this platform where, her movie is now has grossed in a lot of money. Her tour. So she's almost. I think she's going to be projected to be a billionaire sometime soon, and that's
if she wasn't.
Sorry,
I'd be surprised if she wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. And so the key takeaway from that is that compared to a few decades ago, technology has made that leap where we have to break our notion of what's possible and the time frame of what's possible.
Right.
So previously we had low-code tools and no-code tools,
right?
But now we also have AI with low-code or no-code tools,
right?
And so that means that if I have this idea that I'm going to launch this product in 3 months, now that could be 1 month. But I need to be proactive in understanding that and identifying that leap in technology, and I need to leverage on it.
Correct.
Right?
I think until last year, or I think the year before last, no-code tools, low-code tools took over the world, so to speak. Right? I think Canva hit like a certain valuation. I don't remember the number. It went into the billions, and it's an outstanding example of essentially what got simplified, which is design. So today it is AI, and this has started to even further augment the low-code movement altogether. So I believe that this trend in and of itself is quite inevitable. Right? There's going to be more and more new technology that comes in, and as tech progresses, there's also an entire wave that comes behind it, which simplifies that tech.
Yeah.
And that's what low code was all about. You need developers before.
Yeah.
And now you and I can technically do it with minimal understanding of code. So I think also this is a trend that's not just seen across, not just in AI and the Web2 worlds, but also in the earlier wave of Web3. You initially, for the first decade since 2008, when Web3 was getting adopted, you barely had anybody participate in the ecosystem. Then 2019 happened. You had the Web3 boom. You had NFTs come in. You had people going gaga about it. You had, I think, for the first time, in the number of people participating in the ecosystem was in the hundreds of millions. Right, for something that is, in the words of most cynics, made up. Right, but despite that, there have been barriers on that front too. The technology itself needed to be further simplified. Even now, we're quite early in Web3, right? Similar to how the internet was in the 90s. Then today, the kind of apps that we use, the cloud services that we use, we don't even know anything about it. You don't even know what's the cloud all that much anymore, except that it exists and it powers my technology. Right?
And I think, speaking of the 90s, when it comes to low-code tools itself, you look at something like Webflow or look at something like Squarespace, right? People, I don't know, people know, I was looking into Squarespace the other day, and they've been around since 2004. It's like a long time. Webflow has been around since 2013, so that's been 10 years, I guess. And I looked at Squarespace from 2004, and back then they pushed it as a drag and drop website builder.
Right.
And I think the founder got $30,000 from his dad or something like that. I think there's some story like that, and then they were able to grow it and make it and get it to this point. And the user experience was so primitive for something like Squarespace back then.
Yeah.
And with AI causing this huge shift in UX now, I think now the focus has been not just like leveraging this cutting edge tech, but also how do we make sure that this is helping builders build faster and build better things. That to me is like super interesting.
Indeed, it is. It's sort of like, I mean, how cool is it that today, on Framer AI, what you need is 1 to 2 well-described sentences to be able to generate entire sets of pages for a fully functional website. And then this technically can now be added to a domain name, right? Swipe of a card, and in less than like 1 hour, you've got a fully functional website up. You potentially can, it's the same thing with getting a fully functional dynamic website. Like you can have a shopping cart and you have an entire e-commerce website up. You have dynamic web apps which can, and it's just a few lines of text now, not even code. So I think that is basically how simplified tech is getting. Right? You get ChatGPT, which is writing out actual code for you today. Right, and it's the same, I think, in sort of, because we are touching upon all domains of AI, of tech. It's also good to know that even though the Web3 wave has died down for the large part over the past year, there's an entire movement in terms of simplifying that through the EIP 4337, the account abstraction movement, so to speak, to simplify this entire tech. And that's when, what we discussed earlier in terms of once all of the tech jargon goes into the back end, right? The simplified stuff, that's what's going to make real outcomes. That's going to sort of really add value and build at scale, right? Things that were taking months now take weeks and now 2 hours, right? And I think that's super fascinating too for me.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to simplifying things and just cutting short on the time frame, and even like building at scale, right? My website, my current website, my personal website is built on Wix right now. And
it is?
It's built on Wix.
Okay.
I've used React.js and like custom code before, but it's just too much of a hassle. So
right.
I've switched to Wix, where like if I need to like make payments enabled on the site, I can do it easily with Wix. I promise there's not an advertisement for Wix. I use it on my site, but I'm not sponsored by them.
We're not big enough yet. I wish we were. One free plan is good enough.
So but they've introduced Wix Studio now. So Wix Studio is this new direction that they're going in, where they want to introduce new AI features. and I think they're going to take on a similar direction that Framer AI has. So it's funny, and even for something like this podcast, like I remember texting you. I think you told me, do we need like good music for the podcast, right? And I'm thinking, I don't have experience in sound design, so how do I do this? And I looked it up. I just happened to like read an AI newsletter, and I saw this tool called Refusion. So Refusion is this tool that I think I'm going to be using for the outro of this podcast, or intro and outro music for this podcast. So I just have to like give this tool some prompts about what kind of music I want. So let's say I want 8-bit retro music, and it will give me the output of 8-bit retro music that it is generated. I can export it, I can use it, and that's amazing. So there is something that I would need, like, sound is some sort of even a DJ or an artist. Now, for the purposes of this small podcast, I can now
do it yourself.
Without having to. I mean, obviously, I don't want to discount. We do need, amazing DJs. We do need good artists. We definitely do. But for something as small as this podcast to start off with, I think it's helping us a lot.
Correct. But essentially, I think the simplification of tech does not take away the importance of that particular role, which specializes in that, right? But I think it's more about making things easier to ship. It's more about making things easy for people to consume and understand, right? Because especially, when I was working with a couple of clients, right? Especially lately, everybody's trying to figure out how is it that AI can get into their workflows and make things easier. Right? And this could probably spark off an entire conversation about tech founders, non-tech founders, and all of that as well. In this aspect, the role of the person, right, is more about how these tools empower a person who already specializes in it. It's more about like what it took probably a team of developers to do, a team of designers to do, now can be done by a single designer or two designers, right? And that's where I see this is real value additive, right? It's not by saying that, hey, AI is here to, or low code is here to replace devs or designers or marketers or writers. It's more to do with helping them do their work so much more better and at scale. Right? Because today I can get ChatGPT to write a piece of code that's going to, I can copy paste it into a coding environment and ship it. It's probably going to give me a flawless backend and a front end, maybe with a few bugs here and there. But it's going to take a developer to optimize this code and actually make something function the way it's supposed to function. Right? Probably now the real value add is the developer now probably needs 15 minutes to code out what it would have taken him an entire day to code out. Right? The same thing with designers, with writers. You need that specialization, the skill to be able to judge the quality of the outcome and optimize that. Right?
And I think, so to your point about like developers taking less time to code, and when you look at it from the point of, it's like someone out there wondering, does this mean like I need to learn how to code, or does this mean I can just like be non-technical completely? I think it's important to talk a little bit about, tech skills versus coding skills. I think it's important to differentiate between that. So I think it's absolutely necessary to have tech skills. You may or may not absolutely need coding skills.
Right.
I'm taking that in the context of AI helping us in this way. Right? So, for example, you could develop a really solid understanding of no-code, low-code tools, and make sure that you have a sort of understanding of some AI tools. Combine the two, and you are someone who is good with tech, so you have tech skills, but you may not necessarily have coding skills. Like you may not know how to write JavaScript code and say that, and that's fine. But it is important that you have tech skills, right? And you were also mentioning about some non-technical skills.
So I think perhaps when you're working on something, right? Be it a product, a business, or a project, anything, you broadly have team members who could be classified into technical folks and not so technical folks, right? So in this sense, entire discussion that we've been having about low code and no code, it has simplified things on the tech aspect, right? The parts which require a lot of work, a lot of time into it, right? And it's helped us scale on that part. But there are also certain non-technical skills which are very crucial to a certain project's success. Right? It could be something as simple as understanding users, sort of user research. It could be how you research the market. How do you figure out the monetization potential of what you're building, which is also important for side projects as much as it is important for businesses, or if you're building out a company, right? And in more cases, more often than not, the reason why you have this distinction of tech founders and non-tech founders, or them coming together, it's easier when a tech person comes together with a non-tech person, because now they can execute together, right? So even though it's easy for now a non-tech person also to do the tech aspects, heavy lifting, with a little bit of extra effort, right? Most people are resistant to do that.
Yeah.
Right? You still have people who are a little on the lazy side, and not that it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental human trait to be lazy. But what this means is that when you're working with somebody, or when you're collaborating with somebody as a tech person or a non-tech person, and you're both founders, or you're both co-creating something together, it's important to understand and also understand the value of what simplified code or simplified tech brings, because it still requires a technical person to be able to effectively ship faster, right? So I think to sort of put this all together, I would say well executed collaboration is sort of the bedrock to success, be it in business or otherwise.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point about you have people wondering, okay, like non-tech founders wondering if they should become more technical, or I think the laziness aspect that you mentioned. I think the hesitation that they have before getting into, should I learn how this works? And I think collaboration, yes, is definitely helpful, right? But I think it's important for whether you're a non-tech founder or you're a tech founder, it's important to understand what are some of the things that you need to learn that, before getting into this business. So let's say something like understanding the inner mechanics or something is my point. So if you want to figure out how to optimize your mid-journey prompts, for example, I think a good understanding of art history will help you understand, will help you prompt things and get more accurate art outputs. Or also, like, how does a Webflow website work with respect to the CMS system? Like, what is a CMS? Why is it that you even have a CMS in the first place for a blog?
Right.
So I think those kind of things, those are some technical details that even a non-technical founder can learn about, and I think it'll help that person a lot. And I think the example of Midjourney keeps coming back to my mind, because I see people like trying to figure things out with Midjourney and trying to get that right output, and I see random outputs. Something that's a very base level prompt, that isn't refined, and even though the visual looks great, it's probably not what they originally had in mind. It doesn't quite convey what they wanted to convey.
Correct.
And so if you took the time to understand about art history, and you took the time to understand things like Art Deco, Impressionism, or pop art, like by Andy Warhol, I think those are some things that would help you understand how these things came into, because AI, Midjourney, something like Midjourney itself, it learns about all these different kinds of art based on previous artworks, right?
Correct.
So I think it's important to educate yourself on art history if you want to, be better at using it for your business. So I think it's every tool, like every AI tool like that, every low code tool like that has those few things that you really need to learn before you get into it. And then once you learn those things, you're instantly 10x better at that thing, and hence your business as well.
Correct. I think now is a good time for us to segue towards the last segment of this episode, where we talk about one person who's really inspired us, or someone we look up to, right? And I'll go first. So I'm not sure if you've heard of this person called Alex Hormozi. He's all the rage over the internet currently. So his story, and especially the way he's sort of gone about doing things, despite being at levels of like hundreds of millions, that and his net worth is I think a little over $100 million. Despite being that, a lot of what he talks about and the way he's gone about, he's a self-made millionaire, by the way, and I think he hit his first million at the age of 23. The way he's gone about it is so actionable and so well structured, and I've learned so much, especially from consuming his content and more. And the reason why he inspires me so much is, in the beginning when he started off, and he started off quite early as well, so that's something that I relate to. He failed consistently, repeatedly. In fact, at one point, he was out of money completely. He was, I think, even a little in debt. He was living with his girlfriend in their parents' house, and he was on the verge of. He'd even told her that he told Leila, his wife now, that he's not seeing. He doesn't have a clear path forward, and if she left him, he'd totally understand. But she didn't. She gave him. She stuck with him, and today, on an unrelated note, they're still together and they're working together. Right? Today, he's a successful author. He's a successful investor. He's an entrepreneur. He's very openly mentioned. The journey from journey to a million and a journey from a million to a billion is completely different. But he's very openly admitted that this is what he's working towards. He's working towards adding those 2 extra zeros towards becoming a billionaire, and that's a big commitment, right? So I think overall, I have learned. I think overall, what I've taken away from his work and how he's gone about things is consistency always beats motivation, right? Persistence is one of the key ingredients of success, and I think the last is to have a strong belief in iterative improvement, which is, and if you really think about it, it's so beautiful. It sparks off inspiration like no other. And on that note, I think I also want to sort of talk about this. He's got one of the most impactful quotes I've ever heard in my entire life. Have come from him. It is, you don't become confident by shouting affirmations in the mirror, but by having a stack of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. Give yourself so much goddamn proof that you are the version of yourself you want to be, and you will become them. Outwork your self-doubt.
Amazing quote. It's a really good quote.
It's, I think, on so many levels, in my personal journey and also otherwise, it just hits the right chords. I think this is what contributes towards me joining the Hormozy fan club online. And I'm sure, like, you've got something similar to share as well.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think with Alex Hormozy, I recently started following him.
You have?
Yeah. I think a few days ago I started following him. Mm-hmm. So I think he has this post about something about the morning routine. It doesn't matter. It's more about what you do.
It's all BS.
Yeah. I love what he teaches, and I think for me, when in 2021, when I was a little lost with what to do in terms of my creative career, I was trying to figure out what to do, because I was stuck in this endless loop of waking up, doing my 9-to-5 job, and like that's it. And when I was a developer, I always did something on the side, and when I was a designer, at that time in 2021, I was working on my 3D art, which is something I was super into. But in terms of business, I was a little lost, and that's when I saw I saw this video by Chris Do, and he was featuring this guest. The guest name was Dustin Lee. So Dustin Lee was a big inspiration for me, because he has a similar story where he doesn't have a job, and he has a wife, and I think she was pregnant at the time. I think he was about to go bankrupt, and I think it was a few weeks or a few months away. I don't remember the exact story, but I think something about that financial strain without this job safety. So this is where he took the time to see opportunities to help other designers. So he saw that there's opportunity to create these brushes and textures for other creative artists. And not just that, he identified a niche. So Dustin Lee is a designer who has a company called Retro Supply Co. And what Retro Supply Co does is that they provide textures and brushes to designers, and they're all in a retro style, as the name says. So he identified that gap of that, okay, there's not a lot of this in this space. And the way he identified is that he spoke to other designers and he was able to not only like understand their problem and talk to them, but he built up this connection with them where he could again go back to them when he had the solution. So he talks to them, he does all of these things, and he works on the solution, which is creating retro brushes and all these assets, and then he goes back to them with this solution. And so he's also able to sell his stuff because he's already identified the problem, identified who he wants to sell to, because that's the people that he already spoke to, and then eventually he ends up selling to them. And so I think that's a great way to go about building your product as a solopreneur. So I think if you're able to identify those key audiences, identify those key problems. But yeah, I think Dustin Lee's story is super inspiring for those reasons. He persisted, kind of falls in the same line as what Alex Holmo is saying, is like to be persistent, and being persistent is super important, right? With my own journey in 2021, from August to December, I finished working on my first book. I finished working on 2 typefaces. I designed 2 typefaces, and I also designed, I think I did a 60-day art challenge where I create one piece of art every day for 60 days. And I also, during this time I worked on my personal brand, I redid my personal brand. So all of those things helped me work on these creative products and help me sell those creative products. And it's not just like I got a lot of success. I didn't get a lot of success from these creative products, but I think these creative products led to bigger opportunities, like a bigger job, and also a business opportunity that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't persisted on things. So yeah, I think that's.
In fact, so I think Dustin Lee's story is the perfect example for what anybody who's setting out to build, be it into a side project, something that's something that is a diversified revenue stream, a company or whatever it might be. I think it's a great example of that. It is not just be passionate about the product and the building process, identify the needs, make sure it fits, make sure that it has certain monetization potential, and being able to hit that monetization and the whole spectrum. And I think Dustin's story is super inspiring because he was able to do all of that despite probably him specializing in just one aspect. I think I'm on board with you for the same reasons. So I think Baps, we've been chatting for a while. I think this is a good note for us to end this episode on. Hopefully our audience is going to excuse our awkwardness. It's just our first episode. It is the pilot episode. And in case there's any feedback, I think we would be opening up a couple of channels of feedback so that we can understand what went wrong, what we can do better. I personally am looking forward to our upcoming episodes. I'm looking forward to having some great conversations and being able to unlock value for our listeners.
I think I'm definitely looking forward to feedback from our audience, and also I think looking forward to conversations with our guests. I think that will definitely help, and I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this podcast provides value to the listeners, and we're trying to really edit this video down or edit this recording down to a point where you're able to get as much value as possible per minute or per 5 minutes or whatever that metric is. So yes, I'm definitely looking forward to this.
Same. I think onto our the next challenge that we have is to how do we make this a presentable podcast episode, and how is it that we can get it out there to the people. So I think I'm going to see you in the next one.
Yeah, I'll see you in the next one.
See ya.